collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, an international climate change conference addresses issues in the Eastern Mediterranean.
What was important about this conference is there were representatives from 35 countries, more than 300 people there, who all agreed on the need to take action that goes further maybe than other parts of the world in this part of the world. Because if we don't, we could face enormous human consequences, migrations on a scale that we've never seen before, areas that may become completely unlivable.
The Pharos International Chamber Music Festival gets underway next week.
The olive grove is sort of in a natural bowl, if you like, and so it's quite protected, and the acoustics are quite good, although it is an open-air venue.
And we find out more about the philosophy of the consortium preparing to build the casino in Limassol.
That's always very important to us because we never cookie-cut anything. We are very respectful to the local cultures.
Last weekend there was an international summit conference in Nicosia entitled Climate Change in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, Challenges and Solutions. There were some very high-key speakers, and joining us from the Cyprus Institute, who organised the event, is Nick Jarreau. Nick, can you give us an outline of what the idea behind the conference was and who did actually come and give their input?
So this conference, which took place last week, came in a very timely manner at a time when the Eastern Mediterranean is already suffering from the consequences of climate change, and it's only going to get worse. And so this conference brought together, it was rather interesting because it brought together policymakers on one side, very high-level policymakers such as Laurent Fabius, who is the former French Prime Minister and the convener of the very, very successful Paris Agreement, COP21. Also great thinkers like Jeffrey Sachs, who is the special advisor to the UN Secretary General for the Sustainable Development Goals, and a whole range of heads of UN agencies dealing with the consequences but also the predictions of climate change. And, of course, also very high-level scientists who have been thinking about climate change, modelling it, trying to understand its impact in particular in this rather vulnerable Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East region.
Now, the Cyprus Institute itself, of course, has its own weather modelling lab and all the rest of it. How did that fit into this whole overall conference?
So this was an ideal opportunity for the Cyprus Institute to also showcase the work that we've been doing in trying to predict the patterns of climate change, not for the whole planet, but rather for this very vulnerable region of the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East, and of course for the island of Cyprus, and also some of the work we've been doing on trying to predict the consequences of this on human societies, on vectors of disease, on public health,
air pollution,
and migration and air pollution, in fact, yes.
Because it's interesting, I think Britain's very recently looking at passing some legislation to try and minimise air pollution, and if you look at Asia, it's a huge problem. So if you look at the speakers and the general topics of discussion, what would you say at the conference came out as the priorities?
I think the priorities very much were in the field of taking action together. It's clear, the vulnerabilities of this region are very clear, they're well established, but what was important about this conference is there were representatives from 35 countries, more than 300 people there, who all agreed on the need to take action that goes further maybe than other parts of the world in this part of the world. Because if we don't, we could face enormous human consequences, migrations on a scale that we've never seen before, areas that may become completely unlivable, an increase in heat extremes, dust storms and many other consequences.
Desertification is the other problem,
and desertification, of course, the impact on water resources with growing population in the region will also be catastrophic.
Now, I know that before the event, I understand you were hoping that there would be a Nicosia declaration at the end of the conference. Was there, and if so, what did it say?
So there was a Nicosia proposition led by Jeffrey Sachs, who essentially proposed that the leadership in the countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, Middle East and also North Africa get together and ask scientists to produce not actual policies, because that's the job of policymakers, but expose to them the possible solutions to adapt to climate change and mitigate some of its consequences.
And some of those solutions must have come up in the conference, and what were they?
Many of these solutions were discussed on the side of energy production, for example, on using the solar and wind potential of this region. In Cyprus, we're all aware of the solar potential. A lot of the options for concentrated solar power, for example, were discussed as options which can have the advantage of, in some ways, turning this catastrophe into an opportunity, and at the same time reducing the emissions that are causing climate change in the first place. But we also discussed water, and of course there were discussions on how to deal also with the social consequences of climate change.
And were there any government or civil service representatives there who will be making the policies? Because sometimes one feels that the scientists, not just in Cyprus but everywhere, are saying what they're saying, but governments aren't really attending these events and taking much notice.
I think this is what was special about this event. It was neither a scientific conference nor a summit. It was something in between. And what it did, because there were representatives from government, not just Cyprus government, but from all around the region, and there were high-level scientists who actually understand the facts and have been studying these facts for decades, they were brought together in the same place. And so, in a sense, this conference wasn't just a bridge between Europe and the Middle East to discuss climate change. It was also a bridge between scientists and policymakers.
And what has come out of it, apart from the proposition? Where do you go from here? Because it's fine and dandy to do this, but unless there is a concrete follow-up, then sometimes it's a bit of a waste of time.
The solutions are not new, they were not discovered at the conference, but the conference was an opportunity to propose some of the scientific solutions. They will not resolve climate change. Whatever humanity does, climate change is happening already. What we can do is reduce the scale of it. We can try and reduce the impact on humankind. And the solutions, many of them are well known, but the idea is that we now have established a channel of communication for those solutions to get out of the lab, of the science, and to go to the policymakers who can actually effect laws and legislation that can actually put these policies into effect.
And of course education, which is probably the bottom line about all of this, so that all of us understand just what we mean when we talk about climate change, particularly in such a fragile area as the Eastern Mediterranean. That was Nick Jarreau telling us about the recent summit conference held in Nicosia with keynote speakers from around the world on climate change in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, challenges and solutions.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
The 18th International Pharos Chamber Music Festival will kick off on the 31st of May and run through until the 6th of June. As usual, much of the programme will be performed at the Royal Manor House in Kouklia near Pharos, but the last concert on the 6th of June will be held in the Olive Grove at the Likipos, just outside Nicosia. That, of course, an open-air venue. Joining us from the Pharos Arts Foundation is Garo Keheyan to give us all the details. Garo, 18 years now you've been doing this. If you can cast your mind back to the first year, how would you say it's changed in the intervening almost couple of decades?
Well, I think when we started, very modest beginnings, but the festival has grown, has expanded, is attracting some of the world's greatest musicians. We've had, huge names who are major figures on the international music scene, like Yuja Wang came a couple of years ago, and many other major names have been. Emmanuel Pahu comes to mind, and of course Dashin Kashimoto, who is the concertmaster of the Berlin Philharmonic and comes almost every year. In fact, he won't be with us this year. So the festival attracts world-class musicians who have stellar careers on the global stage. So in that sense, I think the festival has established a niche on the European music scene as one of the finest small music festivals of Europe. and we've been reviewed in major magazines like the BBC Music Magazine and other classical music magazines. So I think that the profile has really become quite high profile, obviously, since we started 18 years ago.
And if we come to this year, I mean, the Royal Manor House at Kuklia is really part and parcel of the festival now, isn't it? It's always included, if you like, as the central venue. It's quite small, though, isn't it, Garo? So would it pay you, in a sense, to find somewhere where the audience could be a little larger?
I think the scope or the scale of chamber music is such that you need, first of all, you need an intimate setting. I don't think you'd be able to have such concerts at a place like Curium, for example. In fact, I've been to a whole symphony orchestra playing at the Curium many years ago, and of course it had to be amplified and the sound was being blown away by the wind. So I don't think there are large venues that I'm aware of which are appropriate. So I think the scale is right. It accommodates about 200 people. It would be nice if we had a larger audience and we could sort of go up to 300, 350. But I think given the circumstances on the island, I think the scale is about right.
Have you any idea how many people actually travel to Cyprus to make sure that they're here when the festival is happening? Because it does attract people from abroad.
That's right, it does. And we have people who've been actually coming regularly every year for the last decade, if not longer. So, yeah, there are many people who come over to Cyprus, especially for the festival. But in addition to that, of course, there are visitors and tourists who are on the island and who are music lovers and who also come to the festival. So yes, it is a niche market, of course, but it does attract hundreds of visitors, from the island who will come. We publicize the festival internationally and also, of course, locally, so that at any one time, I would imagine there are dozens of people who are coming who are on holiday in Cyprus and have heard about it, in addition to people who come specially for the festival.
And what about the programme this year? Let's start with those concerts that are taking place in Kuklia at the Manor House. Yeah. What sort of things have you got coming up? Because it must be quite difficult to maintain some sort of variety when you're doing this year in, year out.
Not really, because the repertoire is immense for chamber music, and I think we're very fortunate to have a wonderful artistic director of the festival who's sort of hands-on, and together with our own artistic director, Yvonne Georgiadou, who gives a very significant input, I think. Together, the two of them, I think, prepare a very, very varied and interesting program. I was in London last week and I was showing it to friends, and they were actually all commenting on how exciting and interesting and varied the program is. So we have, of course, the standard, pieces, but Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven, but in addition, Schumann, of course, and Shostakovich. But in addition, we bring in, new material. We have Max Bruch this year, Louis Spohr, and is always Ernst von Donahy. So there's always a variety, always new composers who I think, audiences, wouldn't have heard live. Of course, maybe they have heard recordings. So, yeah, there's a wonderful mixture. There's an old chestnut, Arnaud Babajanian's piano trio, which we've had in previous years. But, I think that each year it's quite different and quite varied.
And let's come to the final concert at the Olive Grove in the Ligipos. You mentioned when you were talking about Curium, about the wind blowing it away. It's perhaps a little risky sometimes to do something so intimate, although it's a beautiful space. But to do it in the open air, you are a little bit reliant on the weather playing along.
Well, first of all, this year is also, in addition to being the 18th edition of the festival, it's the 20th anniversary of the foundation. So we thought we would have an anniversary concert in the Olive Grove. And the weather actually is quite predictable in the Olive Grove, and I think that at that time of the day it's very still. There is no breeze, so I think we'll be fine. And it is, in addition, the olive grove is sort of in a natural bowl, if you like. And so it's quite protected, and the acoustics are quite good, although it is an open-air venue. And this year we are also going to have a chamber orchestra, in addition to the chamber concerts which will take place in Kuklia. There will be, I should mention that we cooperate very closely over the last few years with DACUP, which is a wonderful new initiative to create masterclasses available online to musicians, very briefly speaking. So they have been coming over the last few years to Cyprus. They bring with them a film crew and students from all over the world, which is again a wonderful publicity for Cyprus. These are exceptionally talented young musicians who participate in masterclasses around the world, and we are included in the DACUP circuit. They're also going to be going to the Verbier Festival in Switzerland this year, where they are the official sort of master class app there. And I was in Athens a couple of months ago, where Leonidas Kavakos was giving master classes at the academy there, and DACUP were recording all the master classes. So we're very fortunate and privileged to have DACUP as a partner. So the DACUP, they've created an orchestra with exceptional young musicians who participate in these master classes. So they will be giving a wonderful chamber orchestra performance with, I think, a Mozart piano concerto, a Schnittke piano concerto, with some top soloists who will be participating in the festival. Sergei Babayan will be the pianist. He, again, is a major figure. He's on a world tour. He's been on a world tour with Martha Argerich, and he is known also as the mentor and the teacher of Daniel Trifonov, another great young pianist on the global music scene today. So I think it'll be a very, very special open-air, under the stars kind of concert.
And that will round off this year's Pharos International Chamber Music Festival. You can find all the details if you look for pharosartsfoundation.org. The Olive Grove in the Ligibos, well, it is, as we said, an open-air venue, but if you've never been there, you might be amazed to see the wooden decking, the little pools of water, the Zen landscaping, and very atmospheric lighting. That will be the venue for the final concert on Wednesday, the 6th of June, but prior to that, between the 31st of May and Monday, the 4th of June, chamber concerts at the Royal Manor House in Kuklia.
I should also mention, Rosie, if I may, that people should book their tickets in advance, especially for the Olive Grove. So we have a indication of numbers. I anticipate there will be quite a lot of people, and seating is limited. So we should really have an indication. So you have, please do book in advance.
And you can do that on the website.
You can do it on the website, absolutely.
Garo Keheyan from the Pharos Arts Foundation. You can find all the details on their website, www.pharosartsfoundation.org.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
I went to Macau last week with a group of journalists from Cyprus, taken there by the consortium that are going to build the casino in Limassol. One of the first events we attended was the press launch for their new flagship Morpheus Hotel, and after the conference I managed to speak to the CEO of Melco Entertainment, Lawrence Ho, and I asked him whether he was confident that, given the speed at which large constructions tended to be executed in Cyprus, he would be able to meet the proposed opening date of 2021.
Well, I think we are, because, at the end of the day, we've had a lot of experience building in different jurisdictions, because besides from Macau, we've built in Manila, we built something in Russia, so, we're used to different jurisdictions, different construction companies, so I think the strength of our construction management team, project design team, will ultimately help out. But, I think we're also, we have a great partner in CNS, and CNS has a lot of experience on that basis as well. So, it's a collaborative process.
And what about the theme? Because you've got resorts in lots of different countries, as you said, and culture must play a very important part into how successful each resort is, because you've got to appeal to your target audience and presumably also incorporate some of the country. Well, of course, Cyprus, it's Greek mythology, the island of Aphrodite. Is that going to feature?
Absolutely. I think if you see the rendering that we presented to the president and to the Cyprus media in early January, it's inspired by the white houses of like the Greek mythology and what the island looks like in the past. And so that's always very important to us, because we never cookie cut anything. We are very respectful to the local cultures, and also our guests, when they want to go to a new destination, they don't always want to see the same thing every single time.
That's Lawrence Ho, CEO of Melco Entertainments, talking to me in Macau last week. Also at the press conference was Viviana Muscatola from the Zaha Hadid Architects Office, and I asked her if she was disappointed that the Eleftheria Square construction had become something of a joke in Nicosia because it was taking so long to complete.
First of all, thanks for the question. I did the competition stage for the Eleftheria Square, but then there is a very talented team of people back in London that have been working on that project for many years, as you are saying. And of course it is disappointing when a project takes longer than expected. It's disappointing for the people living in the city to have a piece of the, of their public space not given back to them. And it's of course disappointing for the designers who will want to see that creation done in, let's say, shorter than in a decade. There are sometimes, though, conditions that is not only common to Cyprus. I'm from Italy, and there is also took us very long time, for example, to complete the Maxi Museum. But at the end of the day, I think what is important for Cyprus is that even if slow moving is moving, yeah. So I seriously can see. I've seen some of the recent images of the construction site. It's approaching to the end, so it's time to celebrate instead of looking at the past.
Viviana Muscatola from the Zaha Hadid Architects Office. Still in Macau, after a tour of the heart of house, as they call it, that is the employees area behind the scenes, I asked Akika Takahashi, Melco's Chief Officer, Human Resources, about their policy towards their staff.
First of all, the Melco brand for the employee experience is driven by our chairman and CEO, Mr. Lawrence Ho, who has a tremendous commitment to the concept of people. And I call that a concept because not everybody has that commitment to people, and people are important because they are the delivery of our brand promise to our customers. And we demonstrate the commitment to people in many, many things that we do, whether it's their experience at what we call the heart of house, many organizations call it back of house, whether it's their internal career opportunity in which they feel that they come in for one job, but they certainly have the opportunity to progress their career throughout this entire integrated resort.
And when you come to Cyprus, of course, it's an untested, if you like, in your field, set of possible employees, how are you going to approach that? Because you're starting from scratch a little bit.
Well, I've worked in all continents and many, many different industries. At the end of the day, it's a service industry, right? And if it's a service industry, even if you don't have experience, I think we can detect that commitment, the attitude, the potential of someone, and we're very happy to give them that opportunity to learn from us. So we're an international company. We have to understand cultural differences. If we don't understand that, we don't deserve to be an international company. So I'm not worried. We will make sure the Cyprus people will get the opportunity, if they wish.
Akika Takahashi, Melco's Chief Officer of Human Resources, talking there about how they treat their staff. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.